right. Welcome. Welcome to the Flameless Fireside podcast. Tonight is going to be good. We've got Glynn Wilcox with us. And, I've said it a million times on this show. I love talking to people for the first time that I don't know because it just feels more natural getting to know you, getting to know a little bit about you and what kind of makes you tick. So tonight, we're going to get a chance to get to know you, have you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the struggles we've been through. And hopefully we can kind of find some answers that some people that may be struggling with some of the same things can help kind of find answers for tonight. So having said that, Glynn, welcome. Now, am I saying that right? Is it Glynn or Glenn?
It's a little bit of a hard I. It's Goynn. Okay. So it's actually my middle name. It's really funny because me and my kids go by our middle name. So when somebody calls and they use my first name, I know they got my name off of a list. So it's kind of like a secret identity.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah, everybody's got to have like a secret an online name or something like that. I do that when I'm pretty sure I'm going to get spammed by somebody. So I just let them know my fake name. And when I get a phone call for it, I'm like, yep, that's what you get for signing up for that Costco offer. It happens every time.
Yep. The other option with the offers that I've seen is you sign up like the household dog or something. And like,
oh my God.
So, when you get a call for Ruffles or whatever, then, you don't want to spend any time in that call.
I'm going to do that.
I had a dog named Jimmy for years and at Jimmy John's. I love Jimmy John's. I don't know why. It's kind of like one of those classic bachelor places to eat, but they had this bumper sticker that they'd give out for free that said vote for Jimmy. So I had to pick up a couple of those, vote for my dog. It works. So anyway, so Glynn, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you live? What do you do for work? All that good stuff. Kids, no kids, etc. Give us
kind of the big rundown.
Yep.
That's right.
So I was born and raised on the Texas Gulf Coast in a little county called Matagorda County, a small town of Texas. We got about 1,400 people there when I was growing up. It's a really rural county, mostly agriculture. My mom was a teacher. Her and my dad divorced when I was about 18 months old. It was me and I had 3 other siblings. Grew up with a single mom. Went to Southern Utah University. I did my undergrad there. I spent a year at the University of Houston when my grandparents got sick, so I wanted to come back to Texas. After my undergrad, I went into the mental health field for a few years and then went into corporate. During my undergrad, I had done my student teaching and everything and kind of got really burnt out with corporate after a decade. So I went back into teaching. I teach AP Human Geography right now at a school district here in North Texas. I live in Dallas. I've got 4 kids. I have my oldest son and my middle son from my first wife. And then I have 2 younger kids. I've got my daughter and my youngest son that I had with my second wife. So it's a fun thing. Dallas is really nice. We're actually getting hit with a storm right now. Hopefully we won't lose power. But Texas is one of those special places that most people wind up coming back to.
That's right.
Texas is God's country.
Yeah.
I am also originally from Texas, and Celeste claims Texas.
I try to.
She thinks that she is never officially a true Texan. So
you can't be a true Texan unless you're born here. Like that's just like the rule. But I'm trying my hardest.
It is state law.
It pretty much is. It is.
Now, what little town did you grow up in again? What was the name of that?
Markham, Texas.
Markham. Okay,
Yeah.
Whereabouts is that? I know it's on the Gulf Coast, but
So Houston is the big city. We're about 2 hours down the coast from Houston. We're on Matagorda Bay.
are you close to, like,
Fun story. Yeah, it's 45 minutes east of Victoria.
Okay. Yep,
So
got lots of family in Edna. You probably know where that's at.
I'm really familiar with Edna.
Yep.
So,
So good place.
best fishing in Texas, Matagorda Bay.
They love it down there. So I like going down there, hunting on the ranch and all that good stuff. Lots of fun.
Yep.
Texas is a good place.
Yes, it is.
Good barbecue too.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so maybe you can settle a little debate Celeste and I have had.
Oh my gosh.
Prosex or
Glynn.
Buc-ee's?
Okay.
So I am biased with Buc-ee's. I grew up about 45 minutes from Lake Jackson, where Buc-ee's started. I knew the family that started out Buc-ee's. One of their sons is my age, and I hung out with them before Buc-ee's got really big. So I'm biased for Buc-ee's. I will tell you that every time that we head out of town, we stop at a Buc-ee's.
That's right. Yep.
Celeste doesn't even
You're not
have to
biased.
stop out of town. She just like wants to go to Buc-ee's.
That's true.
They have the best beef jerky though.
They have the best everything.
Yeah, they get their beef jerky. Well, most of their stuff is sourced in Texas, but their beef jerky is from this place in Fredericksburg called the Flying Dutchman. If you ever go down to Fredericksburg, you can literally go there and like they will just have pulled it out of the dryer at the Flying Dutchman.
Oh, cool.
Nice. Very nice.
I don't think you're biased though. I just think you have really good taste. That's all.
It's all beaver bites, the beaver snacks are
That's right.
are it. So.
No one understands unless they've had them.
I have no idea.
People who live
Ryan's like, I don't know.
if you're not from down there, you don't know, you can't experience, but
Ryan, this is when you message me your address and I'll ship you some care package from Texas.
They keep expanding. They keep expanding. They're in Alabama. Their easternmost one is in Alabama. I think they're supposed to be expanding west. I know they're doing north. They're up in Denton now.
Well, let me know when they're in Los Angeles.
Oh heavens! But you have In-N-Out out there, though.
It's true.
You are not blessed with Whataburger. You are not blessed with Whataburger.
That might be a place we do disagree. Is Whataburger?
So this may revoke my Texan card, but I actually do like In-N-Out.
Oh, I don't like those either.
Yeah, I don't understand In-N-Out. To me, In-N-Out is like so overrated. I go there, I sit in line for half an hour. I'm like, okay, this is going to be the best freaking burger I've ever had. Like it's going to essentially fill my tank up in my car for the next 6 weeks. It's going to like do the dishes for me. It's going to be amazing. Then I eat it. I'm like, I don't get it. Why did I waste half an hour waiting in line for that freaking burger that wasn't?
Where were you waiting half an hour?
I know, half an hour at like.
Oh, we've got one In-N-Out here, so I'm up in the.
That's why.
So it's all there. It's all the traffic from the first time.
Well, it's not just the first time. It's like everybody
always
In-N-Out. Yeah.
I'm from Colorado, and we just got In-N-Out in the last year, and the lines there are just insane because there's one up in Denver and another one down in the Springs, and there just aren't enough of them, and so whereas I've since just moving to California, they've got like peak times and stuff, but the line you're never waiting like half an hour, and they're not snaking the line around through like another parking lot and back and forth. It's
here's the thing that you haven't lived life until you've gone to an In-N-Out after midnight and got 100 by 100 and shared it with your friends.
Oh, that's 100 by 100.
So 100 by 100 is 100 meat patties and 100 pieces of cheese between one bun.
Oh, that's like that secret menu type stuff, right?
Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah.
Like it's like $1 a patty extra, I think.
Gosh.
When I was at Southern Utah, we used to go down to Vegas all the time for shows and everything. We used to go to the Huntridge there in North Vegas, and there was an In-N-Out a little ways away. So after the shows, we would go over and we'd order. I'll pitch in and get 100 by 100 and just have meat patties and cheese.
Well, now I know why there's a freaking half-hour line, because they're saying you're making 100 by 100. There's someone in the car in front of me. Yeah, forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of those times when you pay it forward and you're like, how much is the person's meal behind me? And it's like, super large. And you're like, never mind. You can't do that one.
I feel like just like the temperature logistics of eating that they're you need, like if you had 10, like it's going to be cold by the time you get to the end. And like if you had like 10 friends, you're still having to go through 10 patties by yourself.
It's the
So,
challenge and the
I
novelty
mean,
of it,
it
though.
would be a challenge and a novelty. No
See,
questions
my
there.
My worry would be like, I would irritate whoever is behind the counter that's like, you got to be kidding me, 100 patties. And so, like, between patties like 39 and 54, there's probably like a couple loogies in between there.
Well,
They're just
that's the
like,
problem. That's the problem is they don't do them anymore. So it was the
Oh.
90s, different time,
Okay.
different
okay,
time.
The
yeah,
90s were a
yeah.
different time for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's because I was in high school. Well, partially 80s as well, but good times.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So, born and raised in Texas. Did you serve a mission?
I did. I served a mission in southern Alberta, Canada.
Southern Canada. Okay.
Yeah.
So you went from the warm weather to the really cold weather.
So the first time I ever saw snow, literally the first time I ever saw snow, I had to drive up Cedar Mountain to Cedar Breaks in November to see it. And it was the most magical thing in the world. And then when I got living in Canada, learned to hate it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does snow down in Houston from time to time. It's not very often.
Not
So
very often.
Yeah, we've had snow a couple of times here in North Texas over the last few years, and we had a big with this last winter, the state
Horrible.
was the end of the world here at this
Yeah,
in the
it
state. So
really was. Not in my house, but in some houses.
yeah,
We managed.
it was
Well,
way too cold.
We call that Snowvid-19. That's what we call. No,
Exactly.
no,
Yep.
no. Snowvid-20. When was
Snowvid
that?
20.
Snowvid-20. There you go.
The Snowvid 20, yep.
Yeah.
yeah.
Or Snowmageddon.
Oh, Snowmageddon. That's right. That's right. It's a good time.
Okay, so you go on your mission, you come back, and you're in college. You go straight to Southern Utah, or do you like kind of go to Sam
So-
Houston for a while first, or give us kind of the timeline of how this all breaks down here.
So I took a bit of a route. So I graduated from high school. I went to Navarro College for a semester. Wound up getting into a car wreck. This guy rear-ended me when I was coming home from a concert here in Dallas. Go home. I opened up my own business. I had an all ages club where I'd have bands coming on the weekend, and there wasn't alcohol or anything, but it was the only real place for anybody to hang out in my hometown. I was out hanging out with the band after a show one night, and they're like, yeah, we're so excited. We're going to UT. We're going to University of Texas. We're stoked. I'm like, I've done this. I kind of want to go back to college and get on with my life. Found a buyer for my business. I think in a couple of weeks, sold it for a profit. Went to the library, because you have to remember, this is like 95. Went to the library, picked out a big book of colleges and flipping through it. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm LDS. I want to flip into see what Utah is about. Saw BYU, gagged a little bit, and decided there's no way.
Okay,
University.
What was it about BYU? I mean, that's kind of the natural migratory path for a lot of return missionaries.
So, well, I hadn't been on my mission yet. I didn't go on my mission until I was older. So my decision process with that was, I knew that I wanted to go to Utah, and I knew I wanted to go out of state. My thought process with it was that BYU is extra when you have that large of a homogeneous group. And I'd always heard the horror stories coming out of Zoo and the Zoobies and everything. And I didn't want that experience. I wanted to see what life was like in Utah, but I didn't want it to be extra like that. So I'd heard about all the horror stories and everything. And so I decided on Southern Utah University. I literally picked it out of a book. I sent all my application and stuff in the mail. And then just drove up there. The morning that I left earlier in the morning, because it takes 24 hours to get out of Texas.
Yeah.
I headed out, and my mom crying on the front porch and everything. And I get out a little bit north, and I'm like starting to reconsider and thinking about this. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. Pull up into Cedar pretty late, a couple of days later. And it was this wonderfully small, magical place. I drove around the campus for the first time and just had that nice, oh, I made a good decision. Wound up going into it. I stayed there for a year. My grandparents got sick. And so I came back to the University of Houston. I transferred back to the University of Houston. Wound up staying there for a year. A lot of weird stuff at the University of Houston. I actually went back to Southern Utah University. I did radio and stuff there. Had really good friends in radio and stuff like that. And my friend Sean, who I did radio with, who's a DJ down in St. George now, we went up to the Salt Lake Temple, and I think it was the first time that I'd ever been up there. And we were walking around Temple Square, and we did like the tour with the sister missionary, and we're at the Christus. And, she's like, oh, have you gone on a mission? And my friend Sean had, and I was like, oh no, I'm never going to go on a mission and everything. And she's like, she slapped me on the arm. She's like, you should. And I'm like, maybe I should. So Sean and I talk about it, on the drive back and everything when we're there and everything. And went ahead and did my paperwork and everything, went in, did all the stuff, went in the MTC, got into, my stake president had been my physician my entire life. Like, he had known me literally since I'd been born, because small town. And we're sitting in his office, and he did the physical for my mission papers in the stake offices.
That's kind of a weird, like,
That's
It's
interesting.
small town.
drop them in cough here in the stake president's office, but okay. It works. It works.
So,
I guess.
we're sitting there, and he's like, well, we knew that I had hypoglycemia forever, right? And he's like, well, we know, I've told Salt Lake, let's just make it happen. We sent it in, got called to Southern Alberta, went through the MTC, went up there. I was in my first area, and the schedule on missions is pretty crazy. And we were in a fairly active teaching area, and our schedule was crazy. My blood sugar wasn't as well maintained as it could, dropped out, passed out a couple of times, which was weird and traumatic for my my companion. I get transferred down to Tabor, which is a very small town in southern Alberta, and wasn't as busy. It was nice and manageable. I'd just done my 6-month tie burning, and we were late getting back to our apartment, and there was a message from my mission president. So, it's like, I think it was like 30 or 45 minutes after we maybe should have been home.
After curfew.
Yeah. And call my stake president, and he's like, well, I talked to your stake, called my mission president. He's like, well, I talked to your stake president. I've talked to Salt Lake, and we're gonna send you home and let your stake president, your physician, do his stuff down there. So hop the bus, get on the plane, fly down there.
So wait. Back up just a second. So they're sending you home because you're having health problems, or because you were late? Okay.
No.
All right. I just want to make sure it's not because you were late on your curfew. Like, dude, that's pretty harsh. You're half hour late, and they're like, all right, you're out of here.
No, I had passed out a couple of times, and it was impacting. Get home,
You were
and
6 months in at this point.
Yeah, 6 months.
Yep.
Had just burned the tie, like literally had just burned the tie.
Okay.
Flying to Houston.
You burn your tie? Is that like a tradition?
It is. You burn a tie. In our mission, it was tie at 6 months, shirt at a year, trousers at 18 months, and then a full suit at 24 months. That was our tradition.
I knew some missionaries that did like Ark Day, where it was like they would literally tear off a page and eat a page of the missionary guide for 40 days and 40 nights, counting down 40 days before they had to go home. I'm like, dude, whatever works for you. I guess a little extra fiber in your diet or something, but missionaries can be weird. So anyway,
it's true.
Totally
it's true.
But yeah.
So come home, flying to Houston, get into my stake president's office, literally straight from the airport. And you have to remember, this is like, A, the 90s, B, I had known him for my entire life. And so he leans back in his chair and is like, well, we tried. I think we should just go ahead and release you and let you get on with your life. And I'm like, that's not how this is done, is it? And if you've ever talked to anybody who's come off of their mission early, I mean, there's an immense amount of grief and guilt that comes around that.
Mhm.
And my stake president was wonderful with it. President Cannon was incredibly nice about it. And he made the point, he's like, you done what you're supposed to have done. Because at the time, I went out when I was 22 into the mission field.
You're
I
an
was
old
the
man.
oldest- exactly. I was the oldest missionary in the mission at the time. And that was the thing. He's like, you know, you've done what you're supposed to do. You've shown that you went out, that you wanted to go out. You had the will to do it. And yeah, you could probably go out and you could probably have a better management and better schedules and stuff like that. But it's time to get on with your life. So it was an interesting kind of switch with it. And it really started getting me thinking about how, you know, grief and how the idea of working through stuff really does impact how you approach stuff. With President Cannon, his big takeaway was, you know, to be willing to try it and not looking at it as a failure is more important than, you know, suffering through something or going all in or something and doing more damage than good. And I was really, really fortunate. You know, we had two really good areas. You know, the drive to the airport with the APs when I was fixing to leave, it was an awkward conversation. He's like, so Elder, have you gotten wet? And he's like the Southern California surfer guy. And I was like, yeah, we've been really, you know, my companions, I've been really successful. And it's like, so like what? Like really kind of probing into it. I was like, well, you know, 6 months I've been out, I've had 5 baptisms. It's, you know, everybody gets to make their choice. And he was taken aback because he's like, oh, wow, I'm like at 18 months and I've only had like 2. And it was such a weird situation because in the 90s and stuff like that, it was about the count, right? And you had in the church, the big thing with South America, you know, racking up as many as you can. And in Southern Alberta, where, you know, it's Utah North in a lot of ways, it was, it's storming here and my daughter is a little scared.
No.
It's okay, baby. It was a weird interaction. So I come home from my mission. I go back to Southern Utah University, and the transition back is really weird because I was out for 6 months. I would still go to firesides and stuff like that, and that conversation would always come up. So it's always that like, oh, you were only out 6 months and then you came home type of deal. So
Let me ask you a question there. Why would you tell anybody that you were only out 6 months? I would just tell them I served a mission. I mean, honestly, to me, I would think it's really none of your business if I served 6 months or 24 months. Served. It's not like I got sent home because I was out, you know, screwing around or something. I just had some issues.
And that's how I would lead with it. Like, oh yeah, I went on a mission to Southern Alberta, and then, you know, deeper into that conversation, it was like, oh, da 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 da, and then the timeline, you would see the wheels turning, and it's like the timeline, and that's where you had to like clarify. Because from my perspective, that's the thing with dating and with personal interact with people, period, is, you know, the stoic sense of radical honesty. Because to have that interaction with somebody, you know, instead of the assumption, instead of thinking about it, instead of doing it, if you're like, yeah, I went out, I had a really good mission, I had challenges, health challenges, and I came home early, but I served an honorable and good mission. It cuts off, not that it cuts off, but it sets the discussion, and it sets the interaction. It makes it where there's no question, and you don't have to back up a statement, or you don't have to do anything. You know what I'm saying? It makes it where that interaction becomes more honest.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I think that I probably wouldn't even go there. I would just tell them I served a mission. I mean, once I get further into a relationship, like if I'm dating somebody for a couple months or whatever, and then we can talk about it and it's going to come out, right? But if I meet somebody for the first time and I'm going on a first date or something, and they're like, okay, well, I want to know, why did you come home early or something? Like, all right, I don't know if I'm really comfortable like with somebody who's going to be kind of grilling about that. Like, I feel like that's a very
Well, I think that it has more to do with where I was, though. I was at a small Southern Utah university where, you know, the student body is not that big. The institute is not that big. And a lot of people know who a lot of people are.
Yeah.
So it becomes, you know, word of mouth, like, oh, you know, it becomes the thing. And that's the thing. I mean, we as a Mormons as a culture, it's not that we're as a culture horribly judgmental. There are checklists that we kind of go with.
to some degree,
And
we as a culture are horribly judgmental. I mean, I will go with that.
trying to be pleasant.
It's become an unfortunate cultural
True,
thing to
yeah.
kind of, you know, compare yourself to your neighbor to some degree.
Yeah. And that was my approach with it, you know, is if I said it up front, you know, just kind of, it made it where it wasn't a thing.
Okay.
So I come home, I start dating this wonderful woman. We wind up getting married in Salt Lake. Like I graduated on Saturday. Since my mom was up in Utah, we went ahead and got married in Salt Lake the following Tuesday.
Oh, wow.
You know, one straight shot. We get into the car, we head down to Dallas. We stay with my sister for a little while. I get a job at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice as a prison guard, and that is a hoot and a holler.
Are you in Huntsville?
No, I was here up in North Texas. I was here in Hutchins.
Okay.
There's a state jail here in Hutchins, and state jail offenses are 2-year offenses, but it was filled mostly with overflow from the penitentiary. So we had a state jail side and we had a prison side at the time. I was there for 6 months. My wife, had she gone transferred down here, she would have lost too many credits. So actually went back up to Southern Utah University. And so she could go to school, and I wound up picking up a second bachelor's because, you know, it was fun. College is fun. So we finish up school and everything. I do my student teaching and stuff the second time we're up there. She graduates, I graduate, she graduates. I worked in the mental health field there in the 5-county region for Southwest Center for a while. And then the economic downturn, we head down here to Dallas because I get a job in a corporate position down here in Dallas, out in Irving, and stay there and, you know, have a couple of kids. We lose one kid. We lose one baby at 20 weeks. And that was a big thing. Moving to the house that we're in now. And she had never really told me or anything, but she considered herself bi. So we go through a pretty rough patch after we lost the baby. We wound up getting divorced because of a lot of stuff. I go back into being single, find another really wonderful woman here in North Texas. We get married. We wind up having our oldest daughter and my 2 older boys from my first marriage. Have our oldest daughter, and then we wind up losing our second daughter at 34 weeks. Her umbilical cord became detached, and we lose her at 34 weeks. Then we get pregnant again and lose Finn, a son, at 20 weeks. And she has a lot of complications with that. She wound up getting pregnant a 3rd time. And we have our youngest son, Owen, who's 18 months now. And then as when he was 11 months, she passed away from a heart condition. So there's kind of everything in the nutshell.
Well, first I wanted to say I'm so sorry for the loss of your your babies and your wife. That's just traumatic. I'm sure that that's probably why we've got this topic that you can definitely relate to. So anyway, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Tough.
Yeah, that kind of brings us to our topic tonight, grieving the loss of a relationship, whether that's with a child or with a spouse or even a parent or a sibling. This can be a very difficult time. I think a lot of people are struggling even now, that I had a friend on Facebook just today post that they lost their only brother to COVID. And that was today. Well, they posted today. I think they might have lost him yesterday. I've had a friend just in the last couple of months pass away from that. So it feels like this is kind of something that a lot of people have struggled with lately. But I want to kind of go back first and just sort of recapture all of this, because you lightly touched on a whole myriad of things there, and we got to kind of unpack this a little bit.
It's pretty dense.
Yeah. So, we got a long discussion about Whataburger and, the secret recipe and In-N-Out, and then like all the meat and potatoes and everything is like this compact little story that went really quick. So unpacking that, when you go back through, you meet your first wife, you guys are married. She experiences a loss they were still in the womb when she lost your child, or she was?
Yeah, so she goes in for the 20-week sonogram, and the
Okay.
20-week sonogram is when they do gender and test and look for any anomalies or anything. And at 20 weeks, they couldn't find the heartbeat.
Aw.
And it was the same, the 20-week mark is kind of the big mark, because that's where you can really tell ultrasound wise that there's anomalies and stuff like that. So it's always really anxiety inducing, and it's exciting because like, oh, gender reveal if you want it, and stuff like that, maybe a gender reveal.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean 20 weeks is kind of a big make or break point.
It is.
So you go in, you have the ultrasound, and obviously it sort of sounds like it kind of took things from your marriage and sort of shot it down kind of a difficult path at that point. Like things kind of, like I said, this was all just really quick on your story, but is that kind of a tipping point or sort of a hinge point in your marriage where things kind of started going a little bit south?
I mean, grief in general has a way of displacing a lot of stuff, period.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, marriage has a lot of give and take, and marriage has a lot of emotional space that you need to start out with.
Yep.
Things with my first wife weren't just because of the loss of our child and something. But it doesn't help. You know what I'm saying? I mean, marriage is largely predicated on this idea of having the emotional range and the emotional space to really interact, to grow together, to be able to be there for each other. And grief has a way of filling up that space. And especially with the loss of a child, even if it is in utero, if it is younger like that, it's still a very large, it fills up a room really quick. And so yeah, I mean, it's not the only thing, but it really impacts a lot of things.
Well, certainly I think when your marriage is kind of in a spot where it's struggling a little bit to begin with, that's definitely going to be something that can shoot it off the rails really quick.
Yep.
So how much longer after that? Now, you guys had a son or two sons together?
We had two sons.
Okay.
Two sons. My oldest, he's in fact, he just got his permanent driver's permit today. He's 16.
Yeah,
and
my insurance. Have fun with
exactly.
that. Yeah.
And my middle son is 13. So
okay. All right.
I mean, that's my first set.
Were they both after your this?
No, they were both before.
Both before. Okay, so this would have been the third child then.
Yeah, this would have been our third.
Okay. All right. So you had the two, you were kind of struggling along. You went through this horrible experience. How much longer after that before you guys were like, okay? Because you said she came out as bisexual,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
Yeah. It was a year, about 18 months, almost 24 months when things really dissolved and fell apart. And I mean, like, that's the thing. I think, like I said, grief has, has a big play in a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, how everybody deals with grief is different. And I mean, my ex-wife and I, we get along fairly well. We chat, we interact with the kids, we co-parent fairly well. Uh, she's a wonderful person. Uh, but that's the thing. I mean, I think, between a lot of things within that relationship, and I think, it's really easy to blame one side versus the other. But I mean, there was a lot of stuff, period, that both of us were dealing with for the first time, that both of us were having to sort out. Uh, I had my ability to cope in a different way, and she had her coping strategies in a way different way, and it just became untenable. So I mean, it wasn't horribly contentious, but yeah, I mean, we ended the marriage. We were co-parenting for a good while, and then here's the thing, and I don't think I talked about it, but right after she moved out, I was here at the house. The boys were here with her, and then the house caught on fire.
Oh my gosh.
So I think it was about a week or so after she moved out. I was in our bedroom, and the alarms go off in the living room. We had packing materials and stuff, and I had left a candle on or something, and stuff was just burning. So I get out of the house. I had some singes, and I'd gotten singed and stuff, and but didn't lose the house. I mean, I wound up rebuilding it and keeping the house. But I mean, it was a nice coda on how to. The way I approached it was, well, that's kind of a good closing on that chapter of my life, and then having to move on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was a rough year.
Man, I'm so sorry.
So how did you kind of decide to pick up the pieces and keep going with things? I mean, it sounds like in pretty short order you jumped back on the horse again. I mean, I don't know, from your story it could have been 6 months, it could have been 6 years, I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, I started like dating again
Mhm.
about a year after the divorce was final, and
So you gave it a little
in
time.
the fire. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was about a year, and then I think I want to say the 20 or the second year mark is when Hope and I got married. My second wife and I got married.
Okay.
So I mean, I try to take a good while to heal and to get things sorted back out and everything, and to take that time to grieve and to really get back situated.
Yeah.
And
Now,
then yeah, I mean,
did your first ex stay in the church, or did she kind of
oh
like,
no,
you know what,
no,
I'm done,
yeah,
I'm
she's
fully
out.
embracing. Okay.
Yeah. So she's married to a wonderful woman now. They live about 5 miles north of us. So
Okay. So they're still in the kids' lives quite a bit.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. And you guys are on good terms, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, I actually chatted with her this evening. She talked to my my middle son tonight and everything. I mean, like, that was the thing, is, again, it all comes down to how you approach it. I mean, it's either be bitter or just get over it. I mean, there's this wonderful saying, then just die mad type of deal. You can kind of be dismissive and say, well, then just die mad. And I don't think that there's any room. I don't think that there should be room in somebody for that. Like, yeah, I could sit there and be mad at her and be vengeful and be upset with her, or accept the reality for what it is, understand it, and find a better way to interact and to move forward.
Well, that always sounds great. I wish I had that kind of option with my ex. It doesn't always work out that simple. But
Very true.
yes, absolutely. So ideal for sure. And kudos to you guys for being amicable and making it work and kind of having that good relationship, especially for your kids.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. There were contentious points, there were times, and then it's just a matter of not being horrible about it.
So you guys were married in the temple, I take it.
We were married in the Salt Lake Temple, in the upper room of the Salt Lake Temple, even.
Oh,
Fancy.
Brigham Young's old office.
Oh, they turned it into a ceiling room, huh?
They did. I believe it was room number 2. It was right up the stairs from the holiest of holies. I don't know where it's gonna be, if it's even gonna be there once they do the remodel. But yeah, you would walk into the celestial room. There was the little vase right next to the holiest of holies, and you would go up these stairs, and there was a ceiling room up there, and it was fairly small, but it used to be Brigham Young's office.
That doesn't surprise me, just from what I understand about like the schedule that exists for ceilings in that temple. I'm not surprised they haven't turned every broom closet into a ceiling room just so they can get through the numbers.
I would suggest, if anybody wants to get married in the temple, though, Tuesdays are the best days to do it because it's one of the slowest days.
All right.
I don't know how true that is anymore on the COVID schedules.
It's true.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Back in the day.
Yeah, there you go. If your flux capacitor starts working and you get your DeLorean working up to 88 miles an hour, you can go back in time and get married on a Tuesday. There you go. Tip for everybody in the audience. So, okay. Well,
so I get remarried.
Yep.
So back to your question. So I get remarried. And Hope, she was wonderful. Loved my 2 oldest sons, the bonus kid thing and everything. Moved down here to Southern Dallas, where we are. And
has she been married before, or was this her first marriage?
This was her first marriage.
Kids coming into the marriage too? Did you guys have
not from her, just my 2?
Okay. All right.
So I think we were married for 2 or 3 years, and then about a year and a half, 2 years, we start trying, and we get my oldest daughter, Susie. Wonderful little redhead, just like her mom, just full of spunk and awesomeness. So we have Susie, and then we're like, okay, well, let's shoot for one more. So we get pregnant with our second daughter, Elizabeth, and things are, Hope had, pretty hardcore morning sickness and everything. We go to church beginning of December. We go to church, and she's not feeling awesome, but she had morning sickness her entire pregnancy. She'd been a little uneasy and stuff like that. In the evening, we get the kids down to bed and everything, and she's like, hey, I'm going to run up to Big Baylor, where her doctor practiced, just so they can do an ultrasound and check everything out. And so she goes up there, and about an hour or so later, I get a call, and she's like, hey, I need you to come up here. They can't find the heartbeat. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean? And she's like, they've tried everything and they can't find the heartbeat. She's gone. And I just collapsed. Like, I yelled and collapsed. Had to pick myself up. Got on the phone. I'm like, okay, how are you? I'll be there as quick as I can. I call our friends next door. They come over to watch all the other kids, and I head up there to Baylor, and I get into the room where they have her, into one of the antepartum rooms, and we both just break down, kind of pull myself together. I'm like, okay, we got to figure out the plan. So we start doing stuff. We get her prepped and everything, we wind up going into one of the OR suites, one of the delivery suites. And by this time it's like 2 or 3 in the 1 or 2 in the morning. And the doctor was the on-call doctor. We had known him through the practice. It wasn't her regular doctor. So they've got her prepped and everything, and I'm standing at her head, and they're fixing to start the surgery, and a nurse comes in and they need the doctor for something else, and he kind of looks over at me, and that bro look, that like I'm sorry look, and he's like, I have to go take care of this. He goes, delivers a live baby, and then come back and they start to work on her C-section.
I can't
So-
imagine what that must have felt like. I mean, being there with my own kids in that moment, I would have just probably prayed, like, let there be some sort of mistake on the ultrasound, let this be like they get in there to start removing the baby and everything actually is okay, or something changed. And I mean, just that desperation in that moment of wanting to have things work out.
Yeah, we were at 34 weeks, literally the weekend before this happens. Like, she goes in for that Sunday. The prior weekend of that, we had finished out everything. We had put the crib up. We had the clothes that we had from Susie. We had already gotten out for the newborn stuff and everything. I mean, we were 18 days away from her scheduled C-section.
18 days at 34 weeks. Did she not carry to full term? Or
she did? No, she was, it was, all of her pregnancies were rough pregnancies. And so we were 18 days away. She was gonna come out in the 35th, 36th week, as soon as they could.
Okay.
So we were like 18 days away. So, he goes out, he does that procedure, he comes back in, he does the little apology, and he like asks, do we want music or anything? And the anesthesiologist, Hope asked for Christmas music because it was December. They do stuff, and they've got the suction bucket like right next to me, and they start doing the suction. It's just bright red, which is bad for embryonic fluid. And I kept telling myself, don't look over, don't look over, don't look over. And he asked for the time, because I have to mark the time. So I hear him say time, and I look over and I see this shock of this head of just dark hair, and I just lost it, and just lost it. And so they take her over to the crib, and they're doing the stuff, and they'd asked us before, they were like, do you want us to take pictures and stuff? And we're like, no, not really. And they're like, well, let us do it. If you don't want to see them, you don't have to. So they do all the prep and everything, all the stuff and everything. And it's 2, 3 in the morning at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like, one by one, they start to file out, they do their job, and they move on because they've got other stuff to do. And so finally they're wheeling Hope out, and the last nurse that was with us was like, well, do you want to come with us? And there's nobody staying with Elizabeth.
Elizabeth was the baby, right?
Was our baby, yeah. Okay. And I'm like, no, I want to stay here with her. So, I get to stay with her at the crib for, it seemed like a little while, because they took Hope, my wife, down to the postpartum room, and then nurse comes back to get Elizabeth to bring her to Hope. And she was perfect. She was at 34 weeks. Had she been born,
she could have survived.
Yeah, she would have had very little NICU time. She would have been fine. Everything was developed. The doctor was like, the umbilical cord, with everything, it looks like the umbilical cord was attached too close to the placenta, and it just became detached, and there's no reason for it, nothing. So take Elizabeth in to Hope and everything, and she gets some time with her, and then I have to come I wind up leaving the hospital and coming home to be with the boys and everything, and to break the news to my older boys. And Susie, I think Susie was about 2 at the time. And then just kind of have to do stuff. They gave us the option that they could cremate her or put her into a cremator and put her into a common grave. Our insurance was not going to pay for anything. Because she wasn't in Texas, she didn't take a breath. And in Texas, to get covered by insurance, you have to be alive for 48 hours to be covered by insurance.
48 hours?
Yep.
So if you get to like hour 45, they've been there almost 2 days. That's it.
So the way that it reads in Texas law is 48 hours.
Okay, so my daughter was born, one of them was born at 34 weeks. She was premature, so I know the time frame, I know about the size, all of that at that point. And she needed some significant NICU time just before she came home. There was feeding tubes and breathing tubes at the beginning and all of that. And the hospital doesn't donate that. That's not free.
No. When I'm talking about insurance, I'm talking about life insurance and other coverages.
Okay.
Medical insurance. Yeah. So,
okay.
So, we're left with this decision on, what do we do with our baby? Life insurance is going to pay out because it hadn't been 48 hours, and funerals are expensive. Luckily we set up a GoFundMe. We had a lot of friends that helped. About a year or two after it, I'm friends with a couple of legislators, and I talked to him, and we've been through session twice with it to try to get Texas state law to change it where life insurance and insurance has to cover disposition of fetal remains. It's failed, but it's passed both times out of committee. It's passed the House once, but it hasn't made it into law yet. And the next session will come back in another 18 months and we'll try again. So, we wound up burying her at a plot out in East Dallas. We have Elizabeth's Day where we would go out on the day that she passed, and we take a pizza out and spend time with her and stuff like that. So Elizabeth passed, we have a good amount of healing, about a year or two of healing time, and then we make the decision to try again. We get pregnant again, and we're both really apprehensive about it. And we hit the 20-week mark, and Hope goes in, and they don't find a heartbeat.
At 20 weeks this time?
Yeah, at 20 weeks this time.
Okay.
And at her doctor's office.
Yeah.
So, we have the litany of options that we have to do there. She wounds up doing the medical, the pharmacy, the medicine procedure. It didn't go that well. She had a lot of heavy bleeding and stuff. They bring her back in, do a DNC, dilation and cauterization, where they have to go out and do the actual medical removal. Still having complications and everything. She gets a little anemic and stuff, but finally heals up. Wait about another year or so, and then start having again. She gets pregnant with our son Owen, and it is just pins and needles.
Yeah.
The pandemic hits, which was always a hoot and a holler. She goes into the hospital with Owen, and Owen is at 32 weeks. She goes into the hospital because she has preeclampsia, and this is at the height of COVID, like the beginning and the height of COVID here in
This
North
is
Texas.
like last summer-ish?
Yeah. So a year from last summer, because we've been in COVID for 18 months.
Okay, well, yeah. Last summer, 2020. There you go.
Yeah. So Owen gets born May of 2020.
Okay.
So he, they keep her in hospital for a week and a half. They do steroids and everything, and they feel comfortable that they can deliver him, that we can do C-section, and that he'll do the NICU, and his lungs are developed enough, he'll be fine. So we go ahead and schedule the C-section. I finally get to go up there. She had to do the full week and a half at Big Baylor alone because they wouldn't let me come up and visit. So get up there. She gets up there. I finally get up there, get the scheduled C-section. Everybody's just worried. It's, it's high tension and everything.
Yeah.
Deliver Owen at 34 and a half. He goes straight into NICU and he's there for about 3 weeks. The evening of the delivery, we're up in the postpartum, and they wound up putting us in a different part of the hospital. We're sitting there chatting and doing everything, and she gets the phone rings, and Hope at the time had been tested, I think 4 times by that point for COVID. And we get a call and they tell her your test came back positive. A test came back positive. You're on lockdown. And I'm like, well, what do I do? I'm like, well, we're going to throw a blanket over you and get you out of here. So they like throw a blanket over me, take me out of the hospital, and it's like, just leave. Owen's in the NICU. She's under quarantine. They wind up sticking her in the COVID ward.
Mm-hmm.
Never gets sick, never is symptomatic or anything like that. She's in the COVID ward and she's having a lot of pain. And she's like, I'm having a lot of pain and this isn't normal. And the nurses in the COVID ward just kind of are they've got better stuff and different things to do, right? So they're like, fine, just take her down to imaging. They take her down to imaging, and she has wound up having a splenetic aneurysm and started to bleed out when they were doing the imaging. So they rush her into emergency surgery. They call me and they're like, hey, we're taking your wife into emergency surgery. We don't know how long it'll be. So
just like that, like,
no, seriously, the call was like 60 seconds.
Wow.
It was like, we're taking her into emergency surgery. She has a splenetic aneurysm. We'll call you when something happens, when we have any news. And they take her in, and I don't hear from anybody for 8 hours.
Oh my gosh.
And 8 hours is a long time to fill. So you start to do Dr. Google.
Yeah, that's plenty of time for your mind to start playing games with you.
Exactly.
I bet Everett's very good at doing Dr. Google. He's a Google expert.
Google can be our friend, except when they start filtering you. Then you go to DuckDuckGo. But anyways, I digress. Go ahead.
So I finally call up there and I'm like, hey, what's the story? And they're like, oh, the surgeons didn't call you? And they're like, I'm like, no. Like, oh, she came through, everything's good. They did the thing, she's in recovery. Yay. So she was in recovery for another week, and because she had a COVID test, couldn't see Owen, couldn't see our youngest. And I had to do 2 weeks of quarantine, get tested and do 2 weeks of quarantine. So
were
finally
you able to see your son at that point?
Nope.
Were you?
Neither. We got to see him on the like the little camera. They set up a camera.
But you couldn't go in and like hold him or.
Nope.
Wow.
Couldn't help
Please
feed him
tell
or
me
anything like that.
They had like the nurses holding the baby and stuff, because
oh yeah.
Okay,
They NICU nurses are incredible.
Okay,
like
good.
they are because I finally went through my quarantine, and one person could go in at a time, either me or Hope. So I would take the morning feedings, and I had to take her breast milk up to give to the nurse for the rest of the day, and then Hope would go up in the afternoon for the evening feedings. So we got to see him in the NICU for about a week after that, because he was still in NICU for about a week or so after that. So we get him home and everything's, still COVID-y. So, we're on lockdown for forever. I'm a teacher, so I was doing Zoom calls for school and everything and stuff like that. And then, about it the following May, so he gets born May 8th, and then we get to about May, and she passed from a heart condition, from myocarditis. And
did she develop myocarditis as a result of COVID? Because myocarditis is like, there's a lot of
correct, but she only had the one positive test. She never had an active case of COVID.
Okay.
We had both gotten vaccinated. We had both gone out to Tarrant County and had our vaccinations and everything. And we were almost 2 months past vaccinations. So we don't
Okay.
know. I don't know why.
All right. Wait. So I'm trying to piece these timelines together here. You got vaccinated last summer when all
No,
this.
we got
Yeah,
vaccinated in February.
Passed, yeah.
Okay. So she passed. This is like down.
She-
Okay.
May of this year. She passed May of this year.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I got to get the right year here. So, all right. I'm up with you now.
Yeah, she passed May 2nd. Owen's birthday is May 8th. So
Okay.
Wow.
right before Owen's first birthday.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, loss is kind of this ongoing theme for me.
This seems to be your lot in life for sure.
It is a thing. And I mean, grief is, I mean, the hymn, "A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief," right?
Mm-hmm.
My approach and my view of grief in general really comes down to this idea of wanting too much. The idea of clinging, of wanting, or making the idea of, you know, I'm entitled to something, or this is, you know, everything's good and golden and stuff like that is antithetical to the plan of salvation. It's, you know, when you draw out the idea of the plan of salvation, you know, you have troubles, right? You go through troubles. And for me, that's the thing, is this idea of struggles and troubles within the plan of salvation is where your metal is actually kind of forged, right? You know, after Hope passed and everything, you know, I'd have stake presidency and you know, people from the ward give me a call, and we were late enough into it that I had a couple of visitors come over, and I was talking to my first counselor, who used to be my bishop here, and you know, he's like, I just, you know, what's your viewpoint on this? How do you approach this? And one of the things that I learned early with stuff, I mean, way back, is your reaction shouldn't be, how you react shouldn't dictate when you react. When you have that approach, when you look at adversity, when you look at grief, when you look at troubles, period, your reaction shouldn't be that much different than when it's just a normal little setback. You know, the passing of my wife, the passing of the kids, they're horrible things. But the view and the approach of it is that idea of that eternal nature view. You know, my wife and I were sealed. All three of the kids were born in covenant and stuff like that. The problem that I think that I know that I even have a little anger and stress towards, is that within the church, we have this, you know, we don't approach grief very well, because it's this idea of like, oh, well, it's an eternal struggle, you know, it's for the best and stuff like that. There's this really kind of punt maneuver to it, instead of us confronting it and calling what it is and saying how horrible and how much it sucks. We're counseled, you know, from the first presidency down, to sit there and say, well, it's just part of the plan. You have to accept it and be part of the plan.
You know, here's the thing, like, I don't know that they necessarily say it's just part of the plan. Like, it's okay, you don't need to grieve, because I know Elder Scott, for example, before he passed, his wife had passed, what was it, 20 or 25 years prior to him, and he never remarried, and he grieved her all the time. He consistently talked about grieving for her and how much he missed her. President Hinckley, when his wife passed, same thing. And I think it's okay to grieve and miss those people. but in the end, not to let it ruin us because we have that eternal perspective. Just for an example, so my mother passed away in March of this year, and it was something that was coming for years, right? Like it was, I wouldn't say it was unexpected. It was to be expected, although she had been essentially ill for, she had been on hospice 3 different times, right? And hospice only comes in, for those who don't know, if they determine that there's 6 months or less of life left. And so we had kind of gone through this process multiple times. And so by the time, it was kind of rolling around and she started showing signs again, and people were saying, okay, this is it this time. Like this time it's for real. And I remember thinking to myself, I've been down this road so many times, so long, and so often that I just don't know if I'll even grieve at that moment. Like, I just feel like it'll be like not a big deal because we've been prepping for this for years, right?
Get the fatigue of it.
Right. And I know all of those things that like the church teaches about the eternal perspective. I'm a big proponent of I love going through near-death experiences and kind of reading about people who've experienced the other side. But in that moment when it was her funeral, I don't even know how to describe it, but there was just this overwhelming, it's like all those emotions for years suddenly were there. Right. And I didn't think that would happen. I just kind of thought man, I wonder if I'm going to go to the funeral and people are going to think I'm callous just because I'm she finally passed. It's a good thing for her and it's about time kind of thing. She's not suffering anymore. But grieving to me is a super healthy process, but it's not something that I guess maybe for our eternal perspective that we should let destroy us. Some people just cannot get past the grief.
Oh yeah, and that's the weirdness of grief. It's been really interesting the last year or so, last 18 months with the pandemic. And I know this is going to sound really weird and out of place, but even with the show WandaVision, if you saw that.
I did not watch it, no.
So all right, so I'm the authority on this. Here we go.
So Ryan's with me,
representative.
Right? Okay. So WandaVision, if you're unfamiliar with it, I don't want to try to do many spoilers here. WandaVision is about grief.
Yes.
And it is about,
I'd agree with that for sure.
It is about Wanda's grief in the last Avengers movie where Vision is killed for the Soul Stone. And it's how Wanda reacts to her grief of losing her husband. And there's this beautiful line at the end of the series where Vision is fixing to go off into the eternities. And he makes this point that grief is just love enduring. And at the end, Wanda has to confront her grief and she has to understand her place and how she can sit with her grief. And it was such an interesting and poignant thing, especially within the understanding of the pandemic, where we have lost up to this point close to 700,000 Americans, friends, family, and stuff like that, to have that confrontation of grief and that such a public, fictionalized yet poignant view of how grief can work. Because grief is such a weird concept. And the best way that I can explain it is when you're having pizza with friends and someone takes the last pizza, you grieve that last pizza. Grief is
pizza. Depends what kind of pizza it is, I guess, but
grief is understanding.
I grieve when they just put pineapple on the pizza.
That is tragic. Grief is the idea of having to live without something. It's understanding how you live without something. the grief of a child, the grief of the loss of a child, the grief of the loss of a parent. I lost my mom a few years ago. I lost my father, who I hadn't talked to. I only met a handful of times. It's this idea of understanding how you live life without the person that you lose. So the pizza analogy is a very simplified way of doing it. When the last piece of pizza is gone, you look at that empty spot and you're like, well, I could have had that pizza and it would have made me bloated and feel awful, but it would have been awesome. It is still a loss. A loss is a loss is a loss. And don't get me wrong, a piece of pizza is trivial, but the principle holds true, because a loss is, for me, a loss is that idea of what I'm losing out on. I'm losing out, with Elizabeth, a lifetime of having a cool little girl. And that is a big loss to deal with the loss of hope. It's losing out on everything with that. And that's where that eternal perspective really does help and kind of meld into it, because grief from an eternal perspective isn't so much a challenge of faith. It is the idea of, well, I've lost them right now, with the faith that I'll get to see him again. And there's a big difference between mourning and faith. Mourning and grief. Grief is internal, mourning is external. Like you're talking about going to the funeral, if I don't do the right thing at the funeral, what are people going to think? I have to go through these ritualistic aspects of grieving in public to help other people in their grief. As a son.
It wasn't so much for me like that I wanted to show anybody. I mean, I don't feel like I need to, if I grieve or if I don't grieve, if people like it, don't like it, I feel like it's none of their business. Like me grieving in that moment for my mom who had passed away, that's entirely up to me, right? Like, I feel like that's a very personal thing. I don't have to broker that or those emotions with anybody else that's out there, including siblings or my father or anybody else. Like, that was just kind of my thing, how I handle it.
But the question of how you handled it, though, that's the important thing, right?
Well, to me, for sure, right? And like I said, I feel like grieving is a very natural and healthy part. Like, if you don't grieve to some degree, I would think maybe there's something wrong. Like, I've heard the story before where, and I can't put my finger on it, so we'll call it apocryphal at this point, until I can actually get the source on it. But President Spencer W. Kimball was in a meeting or something like that, and somebody came to him and said, hey, President, I've got some news for you. Your brother has just passed away. And he turned to the person and said, oh, well, good for him. Kind of like, that's a great thing, And I'm like, if that, like I said, keep that as apocryphal at this point until I can find the source for it. If anybody else out there has that source, please share. I've heard that a couple of different times, but I think the thought is, having that eternal perspective is huge, but at the same time, having this opportunity to raise a child and the excitement around that, and having this as a part of your family, and just the desire to be with them, even to hold them. I mean, for those of us who've had kids, there are always times where you're like, gosh, I'd really just like to sleep right now. Like, can I put you back just for like 24 hours or something so I can just get some good sleep? No more poopy diapers. Like, I'm exhausted. Like, that's one thing. But to truly have them as your family and then to not have that come out the way that you had hoped, that's tragic. And I think not grieving over that is probably worse than, eternal perspective, sure. You and I could both probably sit here all day and discuss how your wife is they're on the other side, raising those children, things are well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That still doesn't take away the pain that is there for you.
Correct. And grief isn't just death. I mean, the grief of ending a marriage, the grief of ending, anything is still a thing. And that's where that healing and stuff. I mean, even from a divorce perspective, you have to take time to grieve the loss of the marriage.
I'd even roll it back in your story, even back to your mission.
Mm-hmm.
Loss of those that last 18 months.
Yeah.
Yep.
Kind of was taken from you.
Exactly. I mean, and that's the thing is there. So, I mean, grief in of itself is understanding loss, whatever that loss is, right? It's coming to terms with that loss. It's contextualizing it. It's hopefully ultimately the acceptance of that loss. Everybody talks about like the seven stages of grief and stuff like that, which gets wildly thrown around. But even within that theoretical construct, it's very clear when it's presented that this isn't, grief isn't linear. The 7 stages aren't linear. You'll jump around in between and stuff like that. And I mean, there's a million different analogies and stuff with grief and things like that. But I mean, you're right. In the end, it's understanding and it's mourning the thing that you don't have.
So somebody comes up to you. Sorry, my little microphone stand here is kind of, give me just a second. My apologies on that. Okay, there we go. Somebody comes up to you and says, gosh, sister so-and-so has just gone through this pregnancy and lost her child. Maybe you're a bishop or a home teacher or ministering brother or whatever they call me. I'm just going to call a home teacher. I've never been comfortable with whatever the new term is. But you're in a position where you can share something with them to help them out. What do you say to them?
I'll tell you the biggest thing in all of the losses that I've had. The best thing that anybody's ever done for me is instead of bringing me a meal, bringing me chips and salsa.
Bringing you a snack instead of a meal?
No, and I'll tell you why. And it seems funny and it seems silly, but sitting down with that chips and salsa was a million times better than reheating or having a hot meal. Because sitting down with those chips and salsa was an iota of normalcy. And that's the thing. Grief and loss and stuff like that is a loss of normalcy. And that's like my number one advice. If anybody in your ward or your friends group or anybody ever loses somebody, take them chips and salsa. Because there will come an evening when they have a moment to themselves and they'll pull out that chips and salsa, and for that brief little time, they'll have some bit of normal, which is the thing with that you don't get with grief is learning a new normal. And I kid you not, chips and salsa gives you one little bit of normalcy that you don't get with grief. So put that on your list, on your ministry list. If something goes wrong, if you got to take a funeral meal to somebody instead of the funeral potatoes, queso or chips and salsa.
Okay. So you bring them over chips and salsa, but you're there sitting in their living room with them. They're talking about it. They're telling you their story. They're grieving. What do you say to comfort them? What do you share with them from your own personal experience that you can say, you know what, I've walked down that path.
Nothing.
No.
Nothing. You listen.
Okay.
When my mom passed
Mhm.
and we went and did the viewing, Hope took the kids and she was at the car, and I was sitting there, and it was just me, and the funeral director comes in, and I asked her to come and have a seat. And I'm like, what's the toughest part of your job? And she, polite conversation. She's like, oh, helping people through their grief and everything. And I'm like, but don't you just listen? Isn't that kind of the thing? And she's like, well, sort of, kind of, and stuff like that. And then I told her a story of my mom. When somebody's in the depth of grieving, nothing's going to make anybody feel better except for listening, because that person has memories and stories and the things that make that person important to them, that to sit there and tell somebody else helps in their grief. So the best thing to say to somebody who's grieving is, hey, tell me about the person you lost. Tell me about so and so. What's your fondest memory about them? Because being able to do that makes them real again. It pulls, it changes the grief, and it helps that person make the person that they lost real again.
See, now this is getting to where I thought you were going with the chips and salsa, was that to make it a communal thing. Like, you're going through this. I brought some chips and salsa. Tell me about them.
That's
Let's
a good
talk.
way of doing it. That's a good way of doing it too.
Like,
I
don't leave
agree.
them the chips and salsa. Open the bag there on the spot. Throw the salsa, throw the queso in the microwave, and let's
Make it happen.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that it's important because sometimes I think people feel like they have to come up with like religious, like, oh, it's going to be okay. They're happier where they're at, whatever. Like they come up with these religious comments. And I think you're right. I think just listening and maybe reflecting what you hear them saying. And then I think that's an awesome idea to ask them about the person. I'd never thought about that. But I think in the church, sometimes it's hard for us to know how to approach people that are struggling with whatever it is, children's death of a family member, or divorce, whatever. Like, I feel like we're just not sure what to say. So sometimes we don't say anything at all. We kind of like shy away. So I love that. Just show up with let's have some chips and salsa and let's talk. Or if it's like you just want to cry, okay, I'll cry with you, but I don't know if that's necessarily the time to be giving advice or scriptural references or, that type of stuff, because you know what, more than likely they know all that, but they just want to be heard. So I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll say this. I know that I believe that there are definitely certain times when it's just shut up and listen and just let them kind of be them. But I think there is a kind of connection that can be made from time to time. And obviously everybody's going to be different. To just have somebody know that somebody else knows exactly how they feel. The reason I say that is the reason why we call the Savior the Comforter, or the Holy Spirit the Comforter, right? And the Savior went through and experienced and felt everything that we felt, so that he might aptly know exactly what we went through. So nothing is, out of his purview when it comes to judging us correctly or understanding our pains or our hurts. He gets all of that. And sometimes, and I've been in these situations before where I just feel like I'm grieving. Maybe it's not a death, but maybe it's like a loss of a marriage, or it's a loss of like just something in our life. And sometimes it's good to know that somebody else has felt my pain too. Sometimes, and that's not to say I go out and ram stories down somebody's throat and say, hey, by the way, I know exactly what you're saying, and I'm going to like come up with an analogy or a story of my life. But sometimes it just feels good. I can't tell you how many people have come onto the podcast to say, it's nice to know other people have been through that struggle as well, whether it's losing a child or, having a stillborn baby or what have you. People are tuning in because they want to know somebody else has walked that walk too.
It's the fine line between sympathy and empathy. There's a big difference between sympathy and empathy. Empathy is listening. Sympathy is telling. And it's always best to move on the side of empathy. And I can tell you one thing, definitely don't tell anybody. You should mark off your list. The worst thing that we as a couple, that my wife was ever told through a lot of stuff, was somebody came up to her and was like, "Hey, aren't you lucky you got one into heaven already?"
Oh my gosh.
True story.
Wow.
It was not a happy minute.
Oh my gosh. So inappropriate.
And that's probably the person in the ward who doesn't have a whole lot of friends, right? Because they just don't know how to talk to people. But anyways, I digress. Kidding.
I think that it's an important point to point out that, like, if let's say you show up with your salsa and you're hanging out with the person, I think that if they know you have something similar or you've been through an experience similar, I think that they'll know they can open up to you because you're there, you're talking, you're listening. I think that your willingness to open and share if asked, or if they say, how did you feel? How did you survive? What did you do? Like, you're there at that point to be like, okay, this is what I did. And this is how I felt. And this is how I managed things. But I don't know. I kind of feel like, yeah, you don't want to go in like guns ablazing and sharing your story, but be open to the fact that they know that you understand. And so they may very well ask, and being able to share that story and willing to share can help heal and help them not feel so lonely. I mean, grief is lonely. It's
Very.
Even with divorce, like, it's lonely. It's lonely to be alone. So, just being able to find a place to bond or a person to bond with is priceless. So
Absolutely. So you've gone through this tragedy, and again, like, sorry for your loss on all of this. The fact that you have such a positive outlook on all this with the losses that you've had, even your wife in May, that's just so recent. Where does this put you as far as like your desire to kind of be out there in the single scene again? Are you like, I just need a lot of time? Or
so there is, it's called in therapy circles and in grief, there's the first year is always easier than the second year, because the first year you go through and you have the first birthday without him, you have the first Christmas without him and stuff like that, and you kind of steel yourself up with those anniversaries, right? But the second year, you're not watching the calendar as close, or you're not, kind of on guard with stuff and everything. And then it kind of hits you. And, you're kind of blindsided with like, oh crap, I forgot that this was an important day or something like that. And from my perspective, like, it sucks. It happened. I know that, I'm not going to get into anything serious for that first year, but I refuse to cut myself off. And more importantly, I refuse to stop feeling, because it's really easy with grief to stop feeling, because you can get so wrapped up in the grief that in of itself that you just want it to stop. You want to stop all feelings, and that's why you have substance abuse and other maladaptive behaviors that get really big and really manifest really quickly with grief, because stopping the feeling is better than feeling through it. And that's the thing. A different approach is to be radical in the approaching of it. to understand is like, yes, I want to feel all of that emotion. Let it wash over me. Let it get through. Me get through it, because that is much more. It makes it where grief becomes a healing feeling than an avoidance feeling. It's easy to avoid, but if you embrace the grief, if you become with that grief, you understand and contextualize it, and you're able to work through it by being honest with it, by being confrontational about it with yourself, and to grow with it and to grow through it, or you can avoid it.
I think that's part of the process. If you avoid it, you're just stuffing it. So
Correct.
you don't go anywhere. But if you embrace it, or at least recognize it, you can say, I feel like this, but I'm going to react in this direction. Like I can feel it, and it can be raw and it can be real, but that doesn't mean I have to take that feeling and make a negative choice. I can try to reroute that, make a positive choice out of it. But yeah, if you don't feel it, if you don't embrace it, if you don't process it, it'll come back.
So,
Some random way, it'll come back.
Yep.
so Glenn, you mentioned WandaVision. I'm going to throw that back.
It's such a good show, right?
It was so great.
The writing in it was so wonderful.
Yep. No, you felt the grief, but I actually was, while you were talking about that, I was thinking back to Inside Out.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to the end, she's bottling it up, and like she's literally feeling less up to the point to where when she finally lets herself feel the grief, the sadness, because sadness is now driving.
Yep.
And suddenly, and that's where the healing starts.
Right.
That's what she needed, because she was grieving the loss of the life that she had and the friends that she left and all of this.
Yeah.
And so I love that movie. It's so great, but it's so many. But anyway, I feel like, yeah, exactly what you were talking about. Like and we've all been through like some kind of a moment where it's like, it's not until we allow ourselves to feel the sadness and feel the grief, and to actually, and like you said, like let it wash over you, and that then that's when the healing starts, and that's when you can start moving forward. And
here's the thing, though, we feel grief throughout your course of your normal day. It goes back to that pizza thing. If somebody cuts you off in traffic, there's anger, but you're grieving the fact that you aren't 2 car lengths ahead. If you drop your bagel in the morning and it does cream cheese side down, or your peanut butter and jelly and it goes down, you're grieving the loss of that. Grief is the idea of losing the thing that you had, and having to find out a way past that. And in childhood development, it's the idea of resiliency, helping create resilient children, the idea of you can help your child understand that they can overcome obstacles with grit and stuff like that, right? In a lot of ways, that's processing grieving too, is the idea that I will come through this, I will work through this, and I will come out better on the other side.
Yeah, I don't know. I just have a really hard time comparing dropping a bagel to losing a child, like
it's not the same thing. It's not the same.
It's not the same thing. And I don't think that that really even constitutes grief when I drop a bagel. Maybe if it was like a pineapple pizza or something like that, we're talking, I'm kidding. But we're talking about like something where you've got a commodity or something that you're just like, dang it. I was looking forward to eating that, versus like, I don't have any emotion in my bagel, right? I don't have any like attachment to it other than, well, gosh, that would have been tasty. All right. But I can get another one, so it's not a huge loss, right? I lose a child. That is on a whole different level. I mean, to compare the two, to me, it just does not compute.
Well, and it's the same thing that I'll tell a member of my stake presidency. The magnitude shouldn't dictate your attitude towards something. And you are correct. There is a fundamental difference between losing a bagel and losing a child. I will completely agree with that. The point that I'm trying to make is grief is similar to that. The idea that I am still losing something, the magnitude, you're absolutely right. It's completely different. But if I completely shut down, and there's a point in everybody's grief where one little thing cascades into you balled up in a crying mess, and it may be dropping that bagel, because that bagel is no different than your child, because it's still a loss, and a loss is a loss is a loss. So
Yeah,
you're
but
right. The magnitude is different.
I just think that the bagel is like, I can go and get one. Like it's
Mhm.
replaceable, like within minutes. Like I think I get you're saying it's a loss, but totally different types of losses in my mind. I don't know. I
They
get
are.
the concept, but I would feel bad like if there's someone sitting in the audience listening to this and they had lost a child, and granted you've handled it the way you were able to handle it, but maybe they still feel horrible about it and they really struggle. And I
Right.
think it'd be disjustice to tell them that their baby is equal to a bagel. I know that's not what you're
They're
saying,
not. Yeah, they're
but
not.
it kind of sounds kind of like that in a way.
So when the way that I look at my grief, and that I look at grief in general, is, we have this idea of an eternal perspective, right? This idea of like, oh, everything will be all right because they'll all get sorted out in the eternities and stuff like that. And then you have the reality and what we have now in our mortality, where I'm living a life without that person. There's a big gulf between those two. It's easy to sit there and say, yeah, it'll get sorted out, everything will be good on the other side. But there's a lot of space between there. The point that I'm making with the bagel or the pizza and stuff like that is this notion that a loss is a loss, and whatever or however big it is, it's still a loss. Great and small, yeah, they may be kind of the same, but you're right. The magnitude of loss is different between your bagel and your kid. I 100% agree with you. The point that I'm making with that, though, is that losing that bagel can hurt, and it does hurt. So
I
hurt
I'm
is
not
very
sure if I'm hurting on my
multifaceted.
bagel.
I just don't. I'm having a hard time with this one.
Yeah, I am
Just,
too.
here's the thing. I just think that with a bagel, I move on. It doesn't alter my life in any way other than crap. I just spent $2 on that bagel and now I got to go get another one or whatever. Or I'm hungry and darn it, now I'm a little frustrated because that was going to be my breakfast, whatever that case might be, right? The other one completely alters the course of my life. It's going to change my perspective on things, my outlook, my emotional status, everything. One of them will not do that, other than in the short term with a bagel, I might change my attitude a little bit just because I have this like frustration of dropping a bagel. The other one, I'm going to emotionally have an attachment that's going to completely alter many, many, many things in my life. My bagel won't alter a thing other than that brief moment. So I think if I had somebody, and I've had people in my ward. I had a home teacher, for example, that great guy, used to come over all the time, and within a couple months, he ended up getting sick. I thought, no big deal, everybody gets sick, whatever. Couple months later, it's serious. He's in the hospital. He's really struggling. And then next thing you know, he passes away. And he was, my age, maybe a couple years older. But, I look at something like that. His whole family now has to adjust. Talking to his wife or something like that, I'm not going to say like, if you lost a bagel.
And I don't think you ever should. So the allegory with the bagel or the pizza is an allegory of loss, period. Loss is loss. And while, you can put the depth and a degree to each and every loss, and you're correct. Losing a bagel is a very small loss, right?
Yeah.
Understanding loss, whether it be a bagel or whether it be, children or a spouse or a relationship or stuff like that, is understanding loss. If you can understand small things, it helps contextualize and understand larger things. And so, I mean, from an eternal perspective, it's there's that big gulf, right? But understanding and contextualizing loss helps understand and contextualize big loss. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, here's the thing. I think this is going to be one of those things that, I understand where you're trying to go with the analogy. I'm just not fully on board with it. And my own personal, I'm not like reconciling it in my mind. I don't see all loss being kind of loss, and then the only difference is magnitude. I think that's too simplistic of a view when you're looking at the grand scheme of things.
I mean, and there are different types of loss, though. I don't think it's just magnitude. I think there is fundamental difference in loss. And I agree with you, and I'm with you on that. Loss of a bagel does not equal the loss of a child. It doesn't equal the loss of other stuff. And you are correct in that. The point that I'm trying to make with that allegory, with that idea is, and I'll go back to the chips and salsa thing, and the very good point of making of sitting down and letting people talk about their loved one and stuff. They've lost a large part of their life, right? And to give space for somebody to feel their loss is the important thing. The allegory of a bagel or pizza is how somebody deals with loss. Oh man, that's going to ruin my day. Or, oh man, I was really looking forward to that, or stuff like that. You don't really have a lot of space to deal with stuff. And within grief, being able to deal with that, to have space to talk about that loss is important, just as much as which side your toast or your bagel falls.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. Usually the last little segment of the show, we open it up to the audience to ask questions, or maybe chime in on the topic themselves. I would love to hear from other people in the audience who have maybe some thoughts on this, would like to talk a little bit more. Oh, there you go. Hi. Got some guests on the show.
Way past your bedtime.
So,
All right, we got David.
All right, David, come on board. Let's see what you got. If you're having a hard time with your camera or your microphone, just let us know. Sometimes it kind of sticks and we can help on that on our end. Okay. Did David raise his hand and then like?
Oh, he's there. He was here.
I know, he was just here. Okay.
All right. Well, anyway, maybe he's
okay. I see your microphone on, David. Can you hear us? I don't know. Okay.
If he can hear us, we can't hear him yet. So.
Yeah, we can't hear you. So
let us know when you get it figured out. We'll get you on here.
Okay. Essentially, in this situation, oh, here we go. We got David popping up. Is your microphone working? We can't hear you. Okay. Well, he fiddles with that. I know there's going to be, with all of these videos, there are people who go back through and watch them later, and some probably who have experienced grief from the loss of a child, maybe from the loss of, a spouse or a loved one. In your case, you've been through quite a bit of grief. You have a lot of experience with both children and a spouse, unfortunately. I would just say, for those people who are still struggling in that moment, don't let the grief kind of be something that you overlook. Like, go through the grieving process and don't just make it to be quick. Like, be full and be honest with yourself about it, because I see all too many people go through, and in order to kind of suppress the grief or to get through it quickly, they want to jump into something else. Like, they want to replace the loss, right? And whether it's a spouse, whether it's a divorce, whether it's a child, whatever it might be, if you don't go through, and this is, my own personal experience on this, if you don't go through that process and just fully adequately heal yourself and get through what you need to do, put yourself in a stable position, jumping into a relationship is not going to be a Band-Aid that will heal that wound. It's just going to cover up stuff that may not properly get addressed into the next relationship. You may be lucky and hop into a relationship and it could suddenly work and everything is better and rainbows and gumdrops. But probably, I would say 99.9% of the time, just trying to find something to substitute in that moment does not fully adequately address what needs to happen in the healing process. Did David, I don't know if he logged out or what, but
I think he's working on his microphone situation.
okay.
Oh, he sent it in chat.
We put it in the chat.
Okay.
I've struggled through grief with the divorce, breaking up with serious relationships, and other difficult experiences. How have you found healing by going through the grief process?
That's the thing. It's the process. Like, everybody has to find their own process. They have to find their own way of dealing with the loss. It's finding a new reality. It's finding who you are through that process. And that's the important thing. And just like I ever talked about, you have to go through the process. You have to put the work in, because putting the work in and doing the things that you have to do and understanding the things that you have to understand is how you grow. I mean, the idea of progression is that idea of working through stuff. We're here to progress.
Absolutely. Okay, we got Nick next.
Come on up, Nick.
And while we're waiting for Nick to come on.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Continue. Hey, so okay, I'll zip it.
Just really quick, before we end tonight, Glenn, I would like, before I forget, just at some point for you to kind of share with us a little bit about the process you went through. So other people who've heard this or may listen to this later down the road are kind of like, how did he get to where he's feeling today, where he's feeling a little more emotionally secure in his situation? Okay. Having said that, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Everett sort of said what I was thinking, because what an horrible experience, but what an amazing thing where you sound confident, you sound like you've healed yourself. So I think what I'd like to know, or what are some things you changed during the process, or, hey, this worked great, I read my scriptures more. I mean, there's basic answers, but what is something like, for me, for my grief, walking? The first 30 years of my life, I never walked, or 40, sorry. And I started walking a lot more and just listening to peaceful music outside for an hour each day. And that really helped me. Is there anything that you did to help, I guess, make the process smoother or quicker or whatever? That's all.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, wonderful question. And there's not an easy answer. I mean, grief is unique to the individual. and the process is unique to the individual. I mean,
But what did you do personally? What helped you? I mean, it might not help others. Like, for example, Nick found walking and listening to music
Yeah.
helped him, but what kind of things did you do in your life that were like, okay, this is therapeutic to me. I need this right now.
one of the things that I did with the kids this summer is we went to Disney World, actually, the one in Florida. And one of the big reasons and why I wanted to do that was because it got us out of where we were. Because we were entering into a new reality. I was entering into a new reality. The kids were entering into a new reality. And you've got to take yourself out of where you are to understand where you've been. Because it's really easy to sit at home and be in the same area that you are. But self-discovery and the idea of growth really comes from travel. It comes from understanding and seeing stuff, right? And I'm not talking about, a backpacking trip through Europe or anything like that. I think walking is a wonderful thing. I mean, I've walked a lot more than I have here. And it's that time to reflect. It's that time to go out and engage in your own thoughts to do it. And travel is one of the best ways of doing that. And I like the idea of, and that's what I've done as well, is literally just walk around, because you have time to yourself. Grief, and for me, through all the process that I've had to do, it's understanding myself and understanding who I am ultimately going to have to become and who I am now. I'm not defined by tragedy. I'm defined by how I react and how I understand, contextualize, and grow through tragedy. And understanding that is how you find your own process. For me, it was having a good road trip. For me, it's, I walk around during my prep period at school. We have a very large campus, and getting to walk around during my prep period through school. For me, it is, taking that 20 minutes before the baby gets up, where I can go onto LDS, onto the library, and literally read the scriptures real quick on my phone before I have to get into the day. It's finding those pockets of time and those things that will help you grow.
Okay. All
I like
right.
that. I think that
Yep.
there's some other stuff that I just about like creative thought stuff that I think we, in our busy lives in today's society, we deprive ourselves with our own thoughts, because, and so I think part of like kind of what you're talking about, so you said that there was a road trip, right? So there's a lot of downtime
Yep.
and stuff because you're just driving. It takes
Yep.
time to get there. And so kind of just opening yourself up to actually like kind of let yourself actually process what's going on.
Yep.
And kind of remove the typical, because like, you're at home, you've got school, you've got work, you've got your schedule, and you're going from thing to thing to thing to thing because your life is full. And so kind of take yourself out of that and then kind of force yourself into a situation where you kind of have like, that's what you've got is you and yourself and your thoughts, and to kind of like work through and process it. And
it's forcing you to be with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that it's important, like if you have children, to make sure that, so I'm gonna throw in the therapy option here. Like make sure if there is something tragic in your life that you get therapy for you and your children. Sometimes kids don't know what to do with grief. They have a hard time expressing their feelings and understanding the situation just because they're too young to really logically think about it. I can't think of the right word, but I think it's important that, first of all, we let our children know what we're feeling and how we feel about things, and that we're real, and that we live in the season we're in. Like, I think it's okay to be like, okay, right now life is crap, and I'm hurt, and dang it, I didn't expect to be where I'm at, or whatever. And then let the kids express how they feel, and just kind of make it like an open forum so that everyone feels safe and able to share their feelings. And then again,
But you bring up a really good point. It is important to have that professional help too. Like I've got I talk to my therapist. My daughter, she has her friend that she talks to. She has her she has her friend, that's her therapist. It's her friend that she talks to.
yeah, absolutely.
Because having that professional to help helps a lot, just as much as being alone with your thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, we happen to have a professional with us here tonight who
I do.
I don't know if he's willing to come on and share his thoughts or not, but
Mic is on and his camera's on, so I'm
Yes.
assuming that means maybe he's willing.
I don't know.
Just don't see him on here. Randy, are you willing to come on?
I'm here, but can I be seen here? I'm in the dark waiting for my kids here at basketball.
We can't
No,
see
we
you.
can't see it, but we can hear you.
See, there I
There you
am.
are.
I'm in the dark waiting for my kids to come out of their basketball here.
All right.
That works though. We're good.
Okay, so other than me looking ghoulish, I guess I can share a thought or
Hey,
two.
it's Halloween
Yes.
season. We're good.
Yeah, the best rule of thumb to know that somebody should go to therapy to help with their grief is how they are coping or how they are not coping. So if a person is having extreme, depression, anger, anxiety, guilt, any of a number of other emotions, and they're just not coping, they're not able to handle regular life events, that's definitely a sign that there's a need for therapy. And the best person to know how they are coping is the person themselves, because maybe on the outside it seems like they're doing okay, but on the inside they know what they are struggling with and suffering with. I mean, it's usually a good rule of thumb in general, I would say, for therapy to be an option. But if a person is really suffering inside, they really owe it to themselves to go get some extra help. The problem with grief therapy, for anybody who's gone and gotten that, is it's uncomfortable. I mean, we're going there to talk about the hardest subject, and by definition, this is the kind of a thing that is going to be easily avoided. Like, it's like, oh, do I want to go talk about this with somebody today? No, I don't. Whether it be a group therapy or an individual therapy, it's helpful when you have a decent group or a decent therapist, but it's very uncomfortable. And so that's the challenge that I've noticed. Research shows that about 70% of people who need some form of therapy, such as for grief, don't get it. I mean, across the board. And so the 30% that are willing to go are willing to have that uncomfortable moment. And that's the main thing I notice when people come into my office for grief. There's a transition where they've had their worldly facade on, and even their own mentality where they're in denial or avoidance of the elephants in the room. And then we sit down, and after we break the ice, it's like, oh shoot, now we're going to have to talk about it. And so I just had a session like that today, where we were talking about hard things. But it's hard. It's kind of like voluntarily touching the hot stove, and a lot of times we would just rather not. So I appreciate that. Yes, people who are willing to do that are willing to be uncomfortable, but for those who really need it, it is a really good idea.
So, Randy, would you say anybody who is in that process and they're not sure whether they need it, to just err on the side of caution and go get therapy?
I would say yes. I mean, as long as you have a decently warm and competent therapist, it's most likely going to be more helpful than more problematic. And like I said, if a person is just really having a hard time eating, sleeping, if they're having extreme amounts of depression, anxiety, guilt, anger, what have you, when they're really suffering, yes, they need to go get some help. And they can't necessarily rely on outside people's opinions. Sometimes people are afraid, I don't know what to say. A lot of times people don't feel comfortable to say, hey, it'd probably be a good idea if you went and got therapy. Like a lot of times people don't know what to say. They're like, oh, how's it going? Oh, maybe I shouldn't ask that. Oh, well, here's what's going on with me. Like people don't know how to handle it. So we can't count on outside people's feedback, people themselves need to ideally be in touch with how they're doing. And like you're saying, Everett, err on the side of caution if possible.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and the one thing that is important, like you're saying, it's not comfortable to go and talk about what we're struggling with. And I found that when I was in counseling for my divorce or for marriage issues, like after counseling, I felt like crap. I almost felt worse after than I did like before I went in. But I noticed that it was a cycle. So I'd go in, spill my guts on something, felt like crap for a couple of days. And then I'd start feeling a little bit better. And then by the time I got around to the next week, I was like, okay, I can do this again. But it took a lot of strength to go back knowing, okay, I'm going to go spill this again. And I'm going to have, 2 or 3 days of feeling like utter crap. But I knew that that was the only way to get it out. Like, I feel like if you don't express it and get it out, then it's just going to like fester and just make things worse in the end anyway. So
in some ways, it's kind of like ripping the scab open and pouring lemon juice and salt on it. And yeah, it's going to hurt. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I empathize with people who just want to avoid it. And even people who come in the office, a lot of times they're tempted to just kind of want to break the ice and talk about other subjects. But then, yeah, suddenly we're talking about the hard subject. Like for instance, today I had a session with a guy that he had a really ugly breakup. He's only a 24-year-old guy. And if we remember when we were 24, people sometimes feel suicidal when they have a breakup when they're only 24. And so, he and I were going to be talking about the subject directly. And I could tell he was in there to work on himself, but he was having a hard time with the subject. And then so, just bringing it up, he's like, okay, I guess we're ready to talk about it. Like I could see it was like jumping into really cold water. But he was willing to come in, and that's a process I see with most everybody who comes in. Grief is a different animal than any other therapy subject.
Change is hard. Growth is hard.
Yeah.
Facing our demons, that's a lot of what it is. I mean, grief is like it's a good metaphor, is facing our demons. Whatever our big elephant in the room is, whatever it is that we really struggle with, and grief is right at the top there of the kind of things we can struggle with in life. It is natural, to be in denial. Like 2 parts of a grieving process that are normal coping mechanisms is denial, which means we tell ourselves a story in our head about it to better be able to cope with it. It doesn't mean we don't know what happened. It means we tell ourselves something to try to soften the reality. And then also isolation. We want to avoid people, places, or things that are going to remind us of the tough loss. And so between denial and isolation, when you walk into a therapy group or a therapy office, like that's out the window. We're going to directly talk about this subject for an hour. And it's kind of like, yeah, it's that really cold water. And some people are willing to do it. And I would never criticize somebody who is not willing to come in. I understand it, but a lot of people really do need that kind of help.
When it comes to doing hard things, I sort of feel like that's where the biggest growth comes. And if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? Like everybody would grow in that situation. But the fact that it is hard should not mean that, well, it's hard, I don't want to do it. Maybe that's where the biggest growth will come, because it is hard.
Yeah. And one thing I try to recommend to people, and this might be helpful for the audience too, is that, whether it be a therapy group or individual therapy, whether it be a workbook, whether it be hypnosis, whether it be EMDR, whether it be any of the number of different things, there are podcasts, there's a lot of different types of resources out there. The best resource is the one that you're willing to do. So that's a good place to start. And what am I willing to do? Like there's a thing called the PTSD workbook. It's pretty good. There's hypnosis you can listen to at night. There's EMDR, which is a type of hypnosis that is especially designed for trauma. And then, like I said, individual therapy, group therapy. Of course, talking to a bishop can be helpful, get a blessing. What is a person willing to do? I kind of see it like exercise. A lot of people don't want to exercise too. People say, what's the best exercise? Like, well, which one are you willing to do? Let's start with that. And I think getting help for grief is like that.
That's a great point.
yeah, it was.
You don't have to do it alone. Somebody with a bag of chips and some salsa is there to listen. Your therapist is there to listen. You don't have to do stuff alone. And it's really hard in the depth of grief to have the courage to ask for help.
Yeah.
Yeah, something I've talked to people about, and, perhaps this can be helpful for some people in the group, but, I just, ask people who are kind of considering, do I want to deal with this grief topic? And I even have clients who are in my sessions to deal with it who don't want to deal with it. And so, I just ask people, how tired are you of feeling this way? And people tend to be pretty tired of it. And so when they think of it that way, then a lot of times they are willing finally to face their tough situation. Boys are coming in from basketball, so I'm not checking. Say hi, Jonah.
Hello.
How's it going?
That's my
Thank you, Randy. Appreciate all your.
take care, guys. Good night.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
Randy.
you. Good night.
Thanks.
All right. Well, Glynn, we're kind of past time here a little bit, but I think this has been a good conversation. Any last things you would like to share for anybody else who may listen to this down the road, that just something, and maybe obviously you got your chips and salsa, but any little tidbits that may have helped you to just in that moment process and just move on to the next step? Get out of bed maybe the next day, whatever it might be that people are struggling with.
The biggest thing is to have the courage. Moving through grief is an obscenely courageous act. And to wake up is an act of courage. To get out of bed, to take a shower, to take care of your kids, to go to work, to drive by that place that was special to y'all is an act of courage. And to understand that, to contextualize that, and to draw from that is important, because grief is in the end having the courage to grow and to work through it. So believe in yourself and have the courage.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you very much for coming on tonight and sharing your story. And I appreciate you being vulnerable and letting us kind of hear these things that are difficult that you went through. I'm sure there are other people who have experienced similar that may find comfort knowing that there are other people out there, and maybe other people who've gone through worse. Considering your situation, you've had a lot of loss, not just one situation, several. So thank you for being willing to come on and share those stories with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.